Welcome everyone to the breakout session entitled Nutrition, Food as Medicine. Caitlyn Wallis is here to lead us in this session. During the session, we hope to provide educational information on the basics of healthy eating and how to maintain nutritional goals during and after treatment. So Caitlyn will provide recommendations and resources to maintain a healthy diet, especially during treatment and to help manage treatment and disease-related side effects. So today we welcome Caitlyn Wallis, a registered dietitian who works at the Tom Baker Cancer Center in Calgary with Alberta Health Services. Disclosure, Caitlyn and I work together in the bone marrow transplant clinic, so we know each other quite well, but we won't tell stories. So Caitlyn completed her undergraduate degree in biochemistry, dietetics at Memorial University, and has a master's in public health from Lakehead University. She specializes in oncology nutrition and works with patients diagnosed with hematological malignancies. So Caitlyn uses evidence-based strategies to provide the most recent and accurate nutritional information to patients and colleagues like myself. Well, thank you, Caitlyn, for taking time today to present on this topic to the lymphoma community. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart, for that introduction. And we'll get started. There will be time at the end for some questions. But today, I'd like to talk about some general healthy eating, vitamins and minerals, some foods that are good to include, what your nutrition needs are during treatment, and how to manage nutrition-related side effects. We'll talk a little bit about some cancer diets, and then some resources for nutrition information and for some recipes. So this is the new Canada's food guide, and it's now in line with what dietitians have been recommending for years. So the focus is now more on including more plant-based foods, so having lots of fruits and vegetables. So we want you to make half of your plate fruits and vegetables, a quarter of your plate protein foods, and a quarter of your plate whole grain foods. Water is supposed to be your drink of choice, and the big difference from the old food guide to the new food guide is that milk and alternatives are no longer their own food groups. So dairy products are now included as part of their protein foods. So for fruits and vegetables, the goal is to eat 5 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. So you can achieve that by filling half your plate with fruits and vegetables at meals and also including them at snacks. So 5 to 10 servings might seem overwhelming, but a serving really isn't that big. So a serving is 1 piece of fruit, half a cup of raw or cooked fruits and vegetables, a cup of green leafy vegetables, or a quarter cup of dried fruit. So a lot of people might ask, do I need to choose organic fruits and vegetables to get the best out of my food? There's actually no nutritional difference between organic and conventional produce. A lot of people tend to choose organic foods because they think that they don't have pesticides. But in fact, organic farming can use pesticides as long as they're approved for use in organic foods. And sometimes those pesticides and herbicides can actually be more toxic than the synthetic ones they use in conventional farming. There's also lots of farmers that use organic farming practices, but they don't pay to be certified organic. So there's not really a way to tell how people are farming unless you're actually talking to the farmers. So because both organic and not organic fruits and vegetables use pesticides, it's really important to make sure that you're washing all of your fruits and vegetables before you eat them or cut into them to limit your risk. The most important thing, regardless of what you choose, is that you're eating more fruits and vegetables. We also want you to make sure that at least half of the grains that you're eating are whole grains. So whole grains are made of the entire grain kernel, and there's a picture there. So it includes the bran layer, the endosperm, and the germ. So whole grains contain a lot of nutrients. They contain carbohydrates, B vitamins, protein, iron, zinc, and refined grains have a lot of the bran and germ removed. So you're losing a lot of nutrients in that process. Some refined grain products have those micronutrients added back in, but not all of them. And you might see labels that say 100% whole wheat, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily whole grain, because some of those whole wheat products actually have the germ removed, but 100% whole wheat is still a healthy choice. The other thing to be mindful of is just because the product is brown doesn't mean that it's whole wheat or whole grain. Some bread products are actually colored with molasses and don't have the same nutritional benefits that whole grains do. So make sure you're looking on the label to see that it's whole grain. Some grains that are always whole grain are things like buckwheat, oats, quinoa, and wild and brown rice. So those will always be whole grains. One of the recommendations we have is to limit red and processed meat. So red meat means beef, pork, and lamb. And we ask you to limit that to 3 portions per week based on an average serving size. So that's 12 to 18 ounces per week. If you are cooking red meat, make sure that you're cooking it on a low heat, so things like baking or stewing it. If you're barbecuing it on a really high heat, it creates a char, and that black char can contain carcinogens or cancer-causing compounds. If you do choose to barbecue your meat, you can marinate it, and that will reduce the amount of carcinogens by 80 to 90%. In terms of processed meats, so those are things like bacon, ham, and deli meats. Those are things that are high in sodium and high in preservatives, and we want you to limit those as much as possible. We also want you to try to limit processed foods. So limiting fast foods that are really high in sodium and high in saturated fat. So when you're at a restaurant, try to choose foods that are baked, steamed, broiled, rather than things that are deep fried. If you're at a restaurant that has the nutrition information, you can use that to help you determine which meal is a better choice. You're looking for things that are lower in sodium and higher in fiber. We also want you to try to limit processed foods when you're shopping at the grocery store. So you can do that by shopping the outside aisles of the grocery store more often. The most processed foods are often found on the inner aisles. And the high processed foods are things that are high in calories, but not necessarily high in nutrition. So we call those foods calorie dense foods. The foods on the outside of the grocery aisles are things like your fruits and vegetables, your dairy, your bread, and your meat. And those are things that are high in nutrients or nutrient dense foods. And those are things that we want you to include more of. There's always lots of questions about cancer and sugar. So the recommendation for sugar is to limit added sugar, but that doesn't mean that you have to avoid all sugar. So we want you to avoid added sugar, and those are things like baked goods, candy, cookies, those types of foods. So things that have natural or occurring sugar like fruit and milk, those are part of a healthy diet because they come along with a lot of other nutrients. And in Canada, our nutrition facts table doesn't actually separate between added sugar and natural sugar. So if you look at the nutrition facts label on a container of milk, it will list some sugar, and that's the naturally containing lactose. If you looked at the ingredient label though, it would just say milk. If you looked at something like chocolate milk that has added sugar in it, then you'll see that on the ingredient label. So when you're looking at the ingredient label, you can tell that there's added sugar if there's things like fructose, glucose, sucrose, agave syrup, maple syrup, honey. Those are all sources of sugar that we're trying to limit. And the main thing is that we want you to limit the consumption of sugar-sweetened drinks like pop. So try to have water and milk more often. In terms of alcohol, the recommendation is to limit alcohol as much as possible, and any alcohol consumption does increase your risk of cancer. So if you are drinking alcohol, try to consume it in moderation. So moderation means 1 drink per day for women and 2 drinks per day for men as the maximum. And there are set amounts for your drinks. So if you have a wine glass that holds half a bottle of wine, that doesn't count as 1 drink. So a glass of wine is actually only 5 ounces. And a lot of wine glasses hold more than that. So sometimes you might actually be having 2 servings when you think you're having 1. A serving size for beer is a 12-ounce can, and for liquor, it's 1.5 ounces. So for vitamins and minerals, if you're feeling well and maintaining your weight, you can actually meet most of your vitamin and mineral requirements by eating a variety of food. And multivitamins haven't been shown to make much difference if you're eating well. The only vitamin that we really recommend in Canada to supplement is vitamin D. Because of our geographical location, we don't make a lot of vitamin D in our skin from the sun, so we do need to supplement. There's not a lot of foods that contain vitamin D, so some fatty fish and milk are often fortified with vitamin D. The recommendations for supplementing with vitamin D is 400 to 1,000 international units per day. We don't want you to take more than 4,000 international units per day. So if you're taking more than 4,000 units per day, you can actually accumulate vitamin D in your body, and it can cause side effects, so damage to your kidney and tissues. If you are taking a supplement, most supplements are vitamin D3, and this is usually animal-based, but it is the best absorbed. If you're looking for a vegan choice, you can choose vitamin D2, and that comes from a plant source. So where do we get our vitamins in our food? So things like folic acid you can find in oranges, dark green leafy vegetables, green peas, fortified grain products, beans, sunflower seeds, and peanuts. Your B vitamins are found in your fortified and whole grain products, milk products, nuts, seeds, legumes, eggs, fish, poultry, pork, and beef. And vitamin B12 is primarily found in animal products, so milk, fish, poultry, meat, eggs, and then it's fortified in some foods as well. Vitamin C you can find in citrus fruits, broccoli, cauliflower, green pepper, most berries, potatoes, and fortified juices. Vitamin D is in some fortified cereals. It's fortified in a lot of milk, soy, and rice drinks. You can find it in eggs, the fatty fish, and margarine. Vitamin E is found in vegetable oils, margarine, salad dressings, and egg yolks. And vitamin K is found in dark green leafy vegetables, broccoli, and Brussels sprouts. So there are a lot of foods that are shown to help prevent chronic disease and cancer. The term superfood is used a lot in food marketing, but it doesn't actually mean anything. And there are lots of commonly found foods that contain a lot of great anti-cancer compounds that you can find in your regular grocery store. So berries are really high in a lot of protective compounds, especially antioxidants. If you are having berries, try to choose the whole berries, not just the juice. And you can store them in your fridge for up to 10 days. Don't wash them until you're ready to use them. Cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower contain a lot of water-soluble nutrients, so you don't want to cook them too long. If you're boiling those vegetables, you're losing a lot of nutrients in the water. So cook them by steaming them, stir-frying them, or just have them raw. And same thing with these, you want to wash them just before you use them. Tomatoes are unique because they contain lycopene, and this is a carotenoid compound that is a strong anti-cancer compound, and that's what gives the tomatoes its red color. And tomatoes are one of those foods that is actually better cooked rather than raw. So if you cook tomatoes in a little bit of oil, it actually helps you absorb a lot of those healthy anti-cancer compounds. And then citrus fruit, it's best known for its vitamin C content. You can actually get all of your vitamin C in 1 orange per day. And because it's water soluble, anything extra is just excreted in our urine. So you don't really need that much vitamin C during the day. And citrus fruit, you can use the zest or the whole fruit to get benefits from. Omega-3 fatty acids are really healthy. They're really good at reducing inflammation. They're also good at improving your mood and your appetite. They're probably best known for their heart health aspects, so they're really good at helping to lower blood pressure and lower triglyceride levels. Flaxseed and walnuts are good plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids, and then animal sources are fatty fish like Arctic char, sardines. If you do use flaxseed, you want to use the ground flaxseed rather than the whole flaxseed. The whole flaxseed is just a source of fiber, and it moves through our digestive tract intact. So you want to make sure that you're grinding the flaxseed or using flax oil to get the omega-3s. If you do use flax oil or ground flaxseed, you can store it in your fridge for up to 30 days, or you can store the ground flaxseed in your freezer for up to 4 months to keep it fresh. Pulses are better known as beans, peas, and lentils. They're really good sources of fiber, And actually, kidney beans have the highest amount of antioxidants out of all of our foods. So those are really good things to include in your diet, not only as a source of fiber, but as a source of anti-cancer compounds. And you can store dried beans for up to a year, but the dried beans do require soaking, so some people don't like to use those. If you do use canned beans, try to choose ones that don't have any added salt, or you can rinse them really well. Lentils and split peas don't require soaking, and they cook within 30 to 40 minutes, so those are more convenient options as well. Things like aromatics are foods like garlic and onions. And a really good tip for garlic and onions is to let them sit for 10 minutes after you chop or crush them. And that lets the enzyme alanase work to produce the anti-cancer compound called allicin. So letting it sit for 10 minutes before you cook them allows those anti-cancer compounds to develop, and you'll get the most benefit out of those foods. And then all teas contain high amounts of antioxidants. So whether you choose white, black, oolong, or green tea, they're all really good sources. They have half the caffeine that coffee does. The decaffeinated teas do lose about half of their anti-cancer compounds, but they're still a really good source. So in terms of nutrition specifically for lymphoma, there are no specific recommendations. It's always good to follow really good food safety practices, especially if you're undergoing treatment. So make sure you're washing your fresh fruits and vegetables before you eat them. Cook your meat to the proper temperature. When you're grocery shopping, buy your cold and frozen foods at the end of your shopping trip and put them away as soon as you get home. Cool your leftovers quickly and put the leftovers in the fridge within 2 hours. You only want to reheat leftovers once and eat them within 2 to 4 days. So everybody should be following these food safety practices, but it's really important when you're undergoing treatment because you might be more susceptible to foodborne illness. The only time that there are any further food restrictions if you're undergoing a stem cell transplant, and every center is different for those, so you'll receive more education on that if you do undergo a transplant. During treatment, you might find that you're losing weight even though you're eating your usual amounts of food. And this is because you have an increased need in calorie and protein. And eating is a really important part of treatment that you can control, and it can help improve your side effects and maintain a good quality of life. And eating well during treatment is important for both your physical and your mental health. So like I said, during treatment, you have increased calorie and protein requirements. So they actually increase by 20 to 40% during treatment. So an example is an 80 kilogram or 176 pound person would normally need around 2,000 calories per day. And during treatment, they actually need 2,400 to 2,800 calories. And they go from 64 to 80 grams of protein per day to 96 to 120 grams of protein. So it can be really overwhelming to feel like you need to eat that much more during a time when you don't really feel like eating. So how can you make that possible? So you can try to make every bite count by choosing foods that are already high in calories and high in protein. You can add calories to your foods by adding sauces and gravies. And choosing higher protein foods, you might need to add extra protein to things. If you're following a diet for something like diabetes or heart health, you might need to liberalize some of that diet to allow for more calorie and protein-rich foods. And if you're not able to meet your needs through your food during treatment, you might need to use oral nutrition supplements like Ensure Boost or use protein powder to make sure you're getting what you need. So nutrition supplements like Ensure and Boost can be helpful if you're having trouble meeting your needs through food, or if you're not feeling like you have enough energy to prepare meals. So a lot of people kind of have a bad idea about Ensure and Boost, but there's lots of different versions, and you want to make sure that you're choosing the right version for you. So I usually recommend the high calorie versions because they're high in calories and in protein, but there are new versions that taste a little bit better. So Ensure has the Protein Max version and Boost has a Protein Plus version, and those two taste more like chocolate milk. Some people find that the President's Choice version or the Kirkland brand doesn't have the same thickness and same taste that the brand names do, so they choose those. And then if you don't want to use a dairy-based one, there is the Boost Fruit Beverage and Boost Soothe. The fruit beverage is really sweet, but you can freeze it to make kind of a slushie. And then the Boost Soothe is new on the market, and it's actually designed to be less irritating for people who have mouth sores or a sore throat. So we've talked about needing more protein, but what does that mean? What is protein? So protein is the building block for our tissues, for our muscles. It's one of the 3 macronutrients along with carbohydrates and fat. So getting enough protein in your diet will help maintain your lean muscle mass and your strength. And some good sources of protein are nuts, seeds, soy, so things like tofu or edamame beans, beans, peas, legumes, dairy products, some of the dairy alternatives, meat, poultry, and fish. So one way to increase your protein intake is to make sure you're including protein in all of your meals and snacks, and to add extra protein to your usual foods. So you can do things like use nut butters, add eggs to your salads and sandwiches. You can add nuts, seeds, flax seeds, hemp hearts to hot cereals, to yogurt. You can add pureed lentils to soups and stews. You can also add pureed lentils to baking, so things like muffins, to increase the protein in those foods without necessarily increasing the volume of food that you're having. And if you do use shakes or smoothies, make sure that you're adding a good protein source to those and not just having fruit smoothies. Protein powder is a way to bump up extra protein in your foods as well. So if you have an unflavored protein powder, you can add it to anything with a little bit of liquid. So things like soups or mashed potatoes, you can add them into smoothies, of course. If you are undergoing treatment, you want to make sure that your protein powder doesn't have any added antioxidants or probiotics, so try to choose a plain one. And if you have any questions about that, you can always check with your pharmacist or your dietitian. Some people don't like the texture of the protein powder and they use powdered milk as an alternative. Most protein powders are whey-based, which is a dairy source. But if you do want a vegetarian or vegan source, there are protein powders made from pea and soy proteins. And what about milk alternatives? So some of those nut milks have become really popular. If you don't tolerate dairy or you don't want to have dairy, soy is a really good option. It's the closest nutritionally to cow's milk. Things like almond milk, cashew milk, oat milk, and coconut milk, they're actually just mostly water. So some of them have added vitamins and minerals, so they meet those requirements, but they're still really low in protein. So those milk alternatives count more as a fluid rather than as a protein source. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about managing nutrition-related side effects. The most common ones related to nutrition are nausea, lack of appetite, mouth sores, and taste changes. If you're having nausea, the most important thing is to make sure you're taking any anti-nausea medications. And this will help control those symptoms and allow you to eat. So try to have small meals throughout the day. Having an empty stomach just makes it worse, and you kind of get into that cycle where you don't want to eat because you feel nauseous, but then you feel even more nauseous because your stomach is empty. Try to eat slowly when you do eat, and drink your fluids 30 to 60 minutes before or after eating, so you're not full from the fluids and you have some space for food. Rinsing your mouth before and after eating can help, and also avoiding smells that bother you. So eat in a room with the window open or a fan going. Some people go sit in another room while somebody prepares a meal and then they come back, or they even eat in another room altogether just to avoid the smells from cooking. A lot of people find that they just don't feel hungry, and this makes it really hard to eat. So when you don't feel hungry, you have to eat on a schedule rather than waiting to feel hungry. And it's kind of viewing your food like medicine at this point. So the same way you take medications on a schedule, you need to eat on a schedule. So trying to eat every 2 to 3 hours, even when you don't feel hungry. Have a couple of bites, and if that's enough, then stop. But it's important to keep having those couple of bites throughout the day. Try to eat more when your appetite is better. A lot of people find that in the morning they're able to eat more. So make breakfast the biggest meal of your day, and then you can slowly decrease it as your appetite is lowered. Make sure you're carrying snacks with you. So if you have appointments, bring snacks so that you're able to keep eating every couple of hours. And then choose foods that are higher in calories so that you're getting the most out of what you are eating and you don't have to increase the volume so much. And then choose calorie containing fluids. So rather than just drinking water, drink milk or smoothies or something like that that's got a little bit more in it. If you have mouth sores or a sore throat, hot foods can burn and make that symptom even worse. So try to choose cold or room temperature foods. Choose soft and bland foods that are easier to eat. Some people find using a straw helps to bypass some of those mouth sores. And of course, you want to avoid acidic foods like tomatoes or citrus that will irritate that tissue. Avoid hard, scratchy foods that can scratch your throat even more while you're swallowing. And avoid spicy foods that are hard to eat. And a lot of people experience taste changes. So whether things are salty or too sweet, or just don't taste like anything, this is one of the main barriers to eating for a lot of people. So try new foods and beverages. You might like something now that you didn't like before. One thing we've been doing in our clinic is using zinc supplementation. So using 50 milligrams of zinc per day for up to 3 months can help your taste recover within a couple of weeks. You don't want to take that high dose of zinc for more than 3 months though, because it can cause deficiencies in other nutrients like copper. So don't take it for more than 3 months if you do try that. If something tastes really, really bad, don't eat it. It might be helpful to keep a list of foods that you are able to tolerate and just focus on having those foods more often. And then eat in a pleasant setting where you can relax and feel comfortable. And good mouth care, rinsing your mouth before and after eating can always help with some taste changes. We'll go through some specific recommendations here. So if things taste too sweet, try adding salt, try adding things like citrus or vinegar, and then try some other flavors. So you can use instant coffee or cinnamon to help break through that. If your drinks are too sweet, try diluting them to reduce that sweetness. If things are too salty, you can try adding some sugar, use more herbs and spices to flavor foods rather than salt. You want to avoid having fast food or really processed foods that have a lot of salt in them, and avoid any canned foods that have added salt. So make sure you're rinsing any canned foods really well. If things taste bland or they taste like cardboard, try to focus more on having different textures of food and have a different bite of food each time so that you're getting different textures with each bite. If things taste metallic, try to avoid using metal cutlery and bakeware, so use glass bakeware. You can use plastic cutlery or chopsticks to eat. And then if things are tasting really bitter, make sure you're having cooked foods, so raw fruits and vegetables that are tasting bitter. That bitter taste will go away if they're cooked a little bit more. And again, trying to use things like fat and sugar and salt to cut through that bitterness. So there's a lot of diets that come up if you're looking for information on nutrition and cancer. So we'll talk a little bit about those today. So one of the big ones lately has been the ketogenic diet, and that's a very low carbohydrate, high fat diet that puts your body into a metabolic state called ketosis. And that's where your body is using fat as an energy source rather than carbohydrates. And there are different ratios for this diet. So the classic ketogenic diet uses 4% carbohydrates, 6% protein, and 90% fat. There's also things like the modified Atkins diet where you have 10% carbohydrates, 30% protein, and 60% fat. In comparison, our usual Western diet is about 50% carbohydrates, 20% protein, and 30% fat. So the claim behind the ketogenic diet is that cancer cells can be starved by depriving them of glucose or sugar as an energy source. All of our cells use sugar as an energy source. So having that carbohydrate in your diet isn't going to do anything that way. And taking it away, the cancer cells just use protein or fat as an energy source as well. So there's limited evidence for use in cancer. The ketogenic diet is used as a therapy for epilepsy. And there's lots of research going on, particularly in brain cancer because of the use in epilepsy. But sugar intake has not been shown to directly increase your risk or progression of cancer. And the ketogenic diet ends up being nutritionally inadequate. So it's really important if you are following this type of diet that you're doing it under medical supervision and with the help of a dietitian. And some of the side effects of the ketogenic diet are things like increased cholesterol, micronutrient deficiencies, constipation, brain fog, and then social isolation. Another one is intermittent fasting. There is actually a lot of research going on in this area as well. So intermittent fasting is an eating pattern where you cycle between periods of eating and fasting. There are different versions of it. So alternate day fasting is when you go a full day without eating, followed by a full day of regular eating. Modified fasting on your fasting days, which could be once, twice, 3 times a week, you're having a quarter of what you would normally eat. And then time restricted fasting is every day you go for a period of 12 to 20 hours without eating. And the claims for intermittent fasting are that they decrease blood glucose production, that stem cells are triggered to regenerate the immune system, balanced nutritional intake, increased production of tumor killing cells, and prolonging the lifespan. A lot of these claims are actually not based on anything. They're just kind of anecdotal. There isn't enough evidence to suggest that fasting has a long-term or significant positive effect on health. And that's because most of the research has been done on yeast cells in animals like mice. So we can't actually change any of our recommendations until we see good evidence on human trials. And I think that's the next step that's coming up with intermittent fasting. So just because a lot of these diets don't have any evidence now doesn't mean that the evidence won't change in the future. But at this point, we don't have enough evidence with human trials to make any recommendations that these are beneficial to follow. Another one that comes up a lot is the alkaline diet. And the definition of this is that the foods are alleged to make the body more acidic, and those are avoided, and foods promoting alkalinity are preferred. So trying to make your body a more basic state. And the reason that this diet is promoted is that the theory that cancer thrives in an acidic environment, but can't survive in an alkaline or basic environment. And that's actually true in the lab in a petri dish, and that's because cancer cells themselves make a localized acidic environment, but this actually doesn't spread through our body or into our blood. Our blood pH actually remains within a narrow range of 7.35 to 7.45, and changes to the blood pH outside of this range are life-threatening. So we actually can't change our blood pH, and a lot of the tests for this are urine, and that's actually one of the mechanisms that we use to balance our own blood pH. Another one is the vegan diet. So a vegan diet is an eating pattern that doesn't include any foods that have animal components. And the claim is that following a completely vegan diet will help slow cancer growth or cure cancer. And a vegan diet is a personal choice. It's made for a variety of reasons, but it hasn't actually been shown to have any effect on cancer. And it can be challenging to get all of your essential nutrients from a vegan diet, and it takes a lot of planning to make sure you're doing that. So if you are considering adopting a vegan diet, it's good to work with a dietitian to make sure that you're meeting all of your nutrient needs. And then the last one we'll talk about is the raw food diet. And this is a food that is considered raw if it hasn't been heated over 40 to 48 degrees Celsius. So this often you're doing blending or sprouting or pickling to have a raw food diet. And the claim is that cooking food is harmful to human health and that it kills the enzymes in the food. But actually any enzymes in the food are inactivated in your stomach by the acid there. And some nutrients are activated by cooking. So sometimes, like we talked about the tomatoes, cooking it in oil, it can actually be more beneficial to have a food cooked than raw. So it's best to get a variety of raw and cooked food in your diet. And just a couple of tips when you're looking at nutrition information, make sure you're reading closely, get the whole story. A lot of articles, news posts, they just take a couple of sentences from a study, and it might not actually even be the results of the study, but just something they've pulled out of the study. So if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. And make sure you're going to reputable sources. You are always free to ask your team any questions if you have concerns or you read something that you think you want to consider incorporating into your treatment. And just to summarize, we'll talk about the American Institute of Cancer Research recommendations. And these are recommendations for everybody to maintain a good quality of health. So the first one is to be a healthy weight. And a healthy weight is really the weight that you maintain while you're physically active and eating well. It's not defined by the BMI. The BMI is not a good indicator of health. But a healthy weight is just the one that you're maintaining while you're engaging in healthy lifestyle. And that includes the second one, which is being physically active. So the recommendation for activity is to include 30 minutes a day for 5 days of the week. And that doesn't have to be all at once. You can do 3 10-minute walks during the day, and that counts as well. Eat a diet rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruit, and beans. So that's in line with Canada's food guide and incorporating a lot of plant-based foods. And then limiting your consumption of processed foods that are high in fat and added sugar. The fifth one we talked about, limiting your consumption of red meat to less than 3 servings per week, and limiting processed meat as much as possible. Limiting your consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages, so choosing water as your drink of choice most often. Limiting your alcohol consumption, and then not using supplements for cancer prevention. So there's a lot of supplements that are out there that promote curing cancer, preventing cancer, boosting your immune system. Some of these can have harmful side effects. Some of them can interact with your medications. So if you have a supplement that you are interested in taking, it's important to double check with your team, your pharmacist, to make sure that it's not harmful and that it's not interacting with anything. And then I just have some resources. So these are some websites that have some good evidence-based information: the Canadian Cancer Society, the American Institute for Cancer Research. That one has a really good section on a lot of the foods that are good to include, the research behind them, and the tips. The Farming in Canada website has information on what the farming regulations are in Canada, how food is produced here. A lot of the information we get on our food system is actually coming out of the States, and Canada has a very different food production system than the States. And then the general nutrition information at the unlockfood.ca is actually a website by Dietitians of Canada that has a lot of good information on it. And then the last one is just some recipes. So the Cookspiration website has just general cooking information and recipes. Cook for Your Life is focused on cancer prevention and survivorship. Half Your Plate is how to incorporate more fruits and vegetables. And then the pulses.ca and lentils.org have a lot of recipes for how to incorporate more of those plant-based proteins into your diet. All right, and I think we'll have some time for questions.
Oh, thank you, Caitlyn. That was outstanding, comprehensive. So that was fantastic.
Thank you.
So please, participants, go ahead and post your questions if you have any. So I do have one here so far. So what nutritional change to treatment diet regimens might be needed for those with high blood glucose issues? So I guess if you're diabetic, how might you change your diet if you're going through cancer treatments?
Yeah, so you want to manage your blood glucose as best you can. If you're eating well and maintaining your weight and managing blood sugar levels, then focus on that. If you're having trouble eating, it's more important that you're eating than worrying about your blood sugar levels. You might need more insulin or to start insulin to manage your blood sugars during treatment for that short period of time. And then once you've recovered and you go back to your usual eating, you may be able to come off of that. So it's most important during treatment that you're eating well and maintaining your weight, and we'll manage your blood sugars with medication as we need to.
Okay, great. That's the only question we have so far, so if anybody else has a question, please post it. So maybe I'll ask, so often I get asked by people starting chemotherapy, things you've mostly covered already, but so is there any way to modify the diet to treat the cancer? So you've kind of outlined a few diets with saying there really isn't any evidence behind these.
Yeah.
So as far as treating the cancer with diet, kind of in a nutshell? Is there anything there?
There's nothing you can do to treat the cancer. The best thing is to maintain your health and maintain your lean muscle mass. So maintaining your strength during treatment so that you're able to complete treatment without having to stop or delay it is the most important thing. So sometimes during treatment, if you're having trouble eating, we say kind of throw healthy eating out the window. But once you've recovered, going back to that and maintaining your best health is the most important thing.
Yeah. And as far as, I guess, preventing, say, chemotherapy side effects, so you have helpful suggestions for managing diet if you have those problems. Is there anything people can do to prevent mouth sores or nausea or fatigue or what have you?
There's nothing you can really do to prevent it. It's more about how to manage it once they come on, because some people get those side effects and some people don't. But I don't think there's anything the people who don't get those side effects are doing that's preventing them.
Okay. Maybe just some final words on supplements, because a lot of people and a lot of supplements. So you kind of covered in general, we don't have any evidence that people need those things, and maybe, maybe they're harmful, certainly to the pocketbook.
So you can spend a lot of money on supplements. There are no supplements that have been shown to have any benefit in terms of cancer prevention or treatment. The only vitamin supplement we recommend is vitamin D because it's hard to get through your diet. But all of like the mushroom extracts and things that claim to be boosting your immune system, you don't really want to have a heightened immune system. So when you have a heightened immune system, that's when you have like autoimmune diseases. We actually just want to maintain a normal immune system, and you can achieve that by getting all of your vitamins and minerals in your diet.
And any last words on kind of risks and side effects of kind of high vitamin supplements? So what harm can you do?
So especially especially with the fat soluble vitamins, you can really accumulate those in your body, and there are upper levels for all vitamins and minerals. So there is a point where too much becomes toxic. So for vitamin D, it helps absorb calcium, so then you can get calcium buildup in your blood vessels. You can get damage to your kidneys. You can have an increased risk for kidney stones. So more is not necessarily better. It's about getting what you need and not having too much of it as well.
Okay, great. So a couple more questions have come through. So a couple of specific things about what to eat. So should we eat liver regularly? And then is having raw garlic helpful regarding your immune system?
You don't need to eat liver regularly unless you like liver. Like with everything, if you don't like it, don't eat it. But you don't need to have it. You can get the same nutrients through other foods. In terms of raw garlic, it's not going to make any difference raw or cooked to your immune system. But if you're either way, I would let it sit for 10 minutes before you eat it or cook it after you chop it up to let those enzymes activate.
And is it safe to take, this says vitamin B2, and I guess maybe B12. So is it safe to take vitamin B2 or B12?
You don't need to take it unless you're deficient in it. And if you're undergoing treatment, we usually recommend that you stop taking the majority of any vitamin supplements. So the only one that is safe to take during treatment is really the vitamin D, but everything else we would ask you to stop taking during treatment. And if you are wondering whether or not your diet is meeting your nutrient needs, you can always meet with a dietitian and go through what you normally eat and see how much vitamins and minerals you're typically getting in your diet.
Maybe the last question, anything you recommend for post-chemo?
Post-chemo, if you're in an early recovery phase, making sure you're still getting enough protein so that you're rebuilding all the tissues that get damaged with the chemo. Same with any radiation. You get a lot of damage that you can't see, so you want to make sure you're getting adequate protein. Your increased needs continue a little bit after treatment while you're rebuilding everything.
Well, that's great. So maybe if there's no more questions, we could end this session and people can get prepared to join the next session on CAR T-cell therapy. So thank you again, Caitlyn. That was fantastic.